I'm Brad Power, and this is the Cancer Patient Lab. This is our weekly webinar series, and today we're honored to have with us Ert Dredge, a friend here in the Boston area who has been survivor of three cancers. And he's an example of, I don't know, sometimes we call it a citizen scientist, a rogue patient, but somebody who's been very actively engaged in his care and the decisions that have been taken. And so we like to showcase people like Ert to show people what it's like when a patient gets actively engaged and how they get better outcomes. So before we get into that, let me just do our standard housekeeping things, which are three. First of all, this is for information purposes only. This is not medical advice. We like to arm our patients with information they can take to their medical team. Second, this will be made public. So if you're concerned about having your image, your name, or comment you would make being public, hide your image, change your name, and don't say anything. And third, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we depend on donations to keep our operations going. Would appreciate any donations that you might make, which you can easily do through our website, which has a donate button. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ert.
All right. Thanks so much, Brad. And thank you, everybody, for coming to listen to me meander through some conversation for about 20 minutes here. My name, again, is Ert Dredge. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an engineering director in the Boston area with a history of working in biotech and on the Genome Project. Appreciate y'all coming to listen. As I say, it's going to be a bit meandering and maybe a bit fast to try and fit three separate cancer journeys into a short amount of time and save time for questions at the end. But to start, I'll just say I had my last drink the night before my most recent cancer diagnosis. I know that sounds a bit preachy, but I don't judge at all. I miss it a lot, and I honestly could pause the talk here and spend the next 20 minutes talking about my favorite martini recipe. But as we say here in the title of the talk, I've had three different primary cancers, and I signed up to talk about what I learned over these three separate journeys, and I sat down to think, did I learn anything at all? I'm either a great person to listen to because I've got all this varied experience in navigating different cancer treatments, or I'm actually the cautionary tale. Whatever Ert does, don't do that. It keeps giving him cancer, and I'll let you be the judge of that. But trying to come up with some of my lessons learned, I realized that one thing was that each time I was being treated for cancer, I stopped drinking alcohol. Often it was explicitly contraindicated, but usually it was just easy and obvious to stop. Chemo is pretty intoxicating on its own, just not in a fun way. But each time, though, I eventually started drinking again. I opened a celebratory bottle of wine and then back to normal. In fact, it was a really great way for me to claim that things were back to normal. Like, hey, look, I'm drinking again. This last time was different. I mean, honestly, all of my treatments were different from each other. I might even say there was something of a progression. If I believed in a benevolent force orchestrating this journey for me, I'd say each cancer had been a training ground to prepare me for the next one which was going to be harder, like a 5K and a K and a 10K and then a marathon. My first cancer diagnosis was testicular cancer in my early 40s when I had two young children, a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old. Testicular cancer often appears early. It's usually a young man's diagnosis, and I was even on the late side, being over 40 when I got diagnosed. Overall, it typically has a pretty good prognosis among cancers. Medical science said to me, stand here, do what we say, and we're pretty sure you'll be okay. I didn't take any of that on faith, though. I had to learn everything I could about testicular cancer. So I'm learning about treatment options, but I'm also learning about molecular pathways and famous people that had it and how the treatments were invented or discovered. I'm suddenly reading all these back issues of science journals, like platinum chemotherapy interventions were a completely accidental discovery from some really, really basic research into cell growth and electric fields, which is information that is not going to come up in my treatment plan at all, which was going to start with surgery. Um, After the surgery, my oncologist recommended 2 adjuvant rounds of chemotherapy, despite the clean surgical margins and a chance that the surgery actually did get it all. But I could wait and see. So I asked her, like, what are the differences in my prognoses? watchful waiting versus chemo now? If I did it right now, would it be any different? And she said the prognosis would be about the same. So they said, so just to check, I can take chemotherapy right now with whatever negative impacts it includes, maybe not being needed, or I can wait and see if I need it later and take it then and have about the same outcome. And she said, yeah. So I said, okay, I'll wait. Why would you opt for chemotherapy when you don't need it? The gamble I was taking here turned out to be less about survival and more about side effects, and I didn't realize that was the gamble I was making at the time. But I'll have to get back to that because while we were scanning for lymph node metastases to see if I would need chemo, I was told that my thyroid gland looked a bit snarky. And this is one of the things I learned about being treated for cancer. When you start taking a close look at your health, especially when you start imaging, you'll find stuff. You're in your 40s or older, maybe even in your 30s, and there's stuff going on inside you that is completely asymptomatic. By the time I was 40, I had a fungal skin condition called tinea versicolor that mottled my skin every summer. And I knew about that because you can just see it. But I was completely unaware of what was going on with my kidneys or my gallbladder. And you start taking CT scans or MRIs, and you'll find things. And some of it, you'll glad to have noticed it. Some of it will stress you out for no good reason, but suddenly you're worrying about multiple things, and you have a lot of items on your medical list that aren't actually related to the thing that you were looking for. And I wish I had known that when I started monitoring, so I wasn't in such shock. But I was in shock, and initially I didn't believe it. Thyroid cancer is much more common in women, and I was looking for a men's cancer, right? Um, Probably more sensibly than that kind of logic. The debate over diagnosis and mortality reductions around breast cancer monitoring in otherwise healthy women have been very visible in the prior couple of years. And an incidental finding when I was looking for something else seemed to me to be somewhere between implausible and maybe something that was worth watching, but maybe not worth treating yet. But we did the biopsy, which wasn't terrible, but not my choice of a great date night. And I'm told, yes, it's real. And I move on from denial and anger and on into bargaining. Maybe I could leave half my thyroid in place or something. But this time, I now have more of a view into what the next couple of months would look like for me. And I decided I would shop around for a surgeon. I'm not just going to go with the first one that is recommended to
When
me.
when was the thyroid cancer diagnosis?
2014, and this would be maybe like 8 months after my original testicular cancer diagnosis.
Okay, and at the time of the testicular cancer diagnosis, you did have a CT scan or a PET scan, or so you had imaging workup on metastases anyway. And then as a result of that subsequent workup, that was accidentally diagnosed. Okay.
Precisely. So we were looking for testicular cancer metastasis evidence and found something going on with my thyroid. Um, So I was auditioning other surgeons or multiple surgeons, and I don't actually think that was particularly useful in finding the most capable surgeon. In fact, one stuck a camera up my nose without warning me he was going to do so, so I crossed him off my list. But honestly, I was going to be unconscious for the surgery anyway, and nobody was going to be asking me permission for a nasopharyngeal laryngoscope if it came up again. But interviewing surgeons helped me feel in control. It helped me feel like I was doing something that was going to impact my future. And one big thing is being a cancer patient can leave you feeling like a lab rat. It's a lot of information coming in really fast from people who have spent their careers following it, and they have a plan for you. And to my thinking, though, it's actively dangerous to let yourself think that you're not in control, that you just need to do what you're told. I think it's dangerous, even if that might be a little bit true sometimes, that there is a very clear plan and you can just follow along with it. I think feeling that this is your story and you're controlling it is really, really important. It's also dangerous to think you can do a better job just listening to a chatbot than a trained care team. So this isn't like just ignore what people are telling you who have been training this for a long time. But even if my efforts did nothing to help me find a more capable surgeon, I do highly recommend looking at multiple treatment providers if your insurance situation and location allows it. But eventually I did pick somebody and he took my thyroid. The follow-up to thyroid cancer surgery, radioiodine ablation therapy, is the magic bullet that I wish we had for every cancer. And it's just darkly funny. I'm literally high from weeks of an iodine-free diet to prepare, and I enter this really small room with a nuclear medicine technologist and an oncologist, while four oncology residents sort of stood outside the room, peering through a little porthole window from a safe distance. And I'm handed a pill that I'm not allowed to touch, but I have to swallow, which sounds like a riddle, and it's not a riddle. And after I've swallowed, the nuclear medicine technologist points a Geiger counter at my abdomen to confirm that it had indeed gone down, and it had. So for the next few days, my urine and my sweat are going to be radioactive and capable of smiting my enemies. And with great power comes great responsibility. So I was told to go directly home without interacting with anybody. So, as you remember, I was actually trying to solve the testicular cancer situation when I was pulled into the thyroid cancer thing, like some Douglas Adams side quest. And the downside for me to the incredible specificity of radioiodine treatment for thyroid cancer is it does nothing at all to impact any other cancers partying up in my body. And indeed, 2 months later, we found a rapidly growing lymph node. So, as I said earlier, the gamble that I had taken on watchful waiting would turn out to be less about survival and more about side effects. So, my prognosis was still excellent, but with a visible metastasis, that was going to be 3 rounds of BEP chemotherapy instead of the 2 I would have done earlier. And it was during the 3rd round that I really noticed the hearing damage set in. Ototoxicity resulting in tinnitus is a well-known effect of cisplatin. And aware of this in advance, I researched preventative measures and discovered emerging research that antioxidants might help. But my oncologist cautioned me that antioxidants might interfere with the efficacy of the chemo, and so I chose not to take them based on that. But at this time, fresh off my shopping around for surgeons, this was the point that I also decided to switch from my local hospital to Dana-Farber here in the Boston area to start my infusions. I'm really not happy being a person who needs a default choice in where I go for cancer treatments, but I do feel very privileged to be able to go to a dedicated cancer center rather than a hospital where it's equally well set up for treating bacterial infections and motorcycle accidents and a million other things. I got a lot of comfort out of walking into a place that felt like it was there for the support of people that were going through what I was going through. A long time ago, I was going to school at Baylor College of Medicine, and my girlfriend at the time was working in MD Anderson's patient advocacy department, and they really impressed me. And at the time, I said if I was ever diagnosed with cancer, I would return to Houston for my treatment. That didn't turn out to be practical, but I did listen to my past self in thinking about a dedicated institution. I rode a bicycle to all my chemo infusion appointments. I know that also sounds pretty cheap, but if biking to a medical appointment is an option for you at all, I recommend it. It was pretty much the best part of every week during what was a really bleak time. And I knew there was good research saying that staying as active as I felt I could be could bring improved clinical outcomes. And again, I felt like I was doing something. I also dyed my hair pink before I started so I could show that it was my hair. It didn't belong to the cancer or the etoposide. And when it started to fall out, it looked like I was shedding cotton candy, which was kind of amusing. Biking back from chemotherapy, that wasn't really a thing. What I did do was ask different friends to drive me home from many of the appointments. If you're going through cancer treatments, I really hope you have a supportive community around you. I was really lucky to have one, and I had a lot of friends and acquaintances that were looking for ways to help. Saying, hey, can you take an hour and pick me up for my chemo appointment ended up being a spectacular way for me to get a little bit of time with each of a number of different people at a time that I wasn't otherwise being particularly social. Gave me a chance to catch up with them a bit one-on-one, tell them a bit of what I was going through, and give an avenue for them to show support that wasn't making a casserole. I also blogged a lot, which helped me work out my fears and my feelings while keeping friends up to date. Social media has a lot to answer for generally, but I definitely owe it a debt on this one. After recovery, I had about 20 dB hearing loss, Raynaud's phenomena, some other side effects. But on the plus side, the tinea versicolor skin condition was cured. If you're a radiodermatologic toxotherapist, call me. Then my celebratory bottle of wine and back to normal. Time passed. My kids got bigger. When COVID hit, I found myself often thinking of all the immunocompromised chemo patients that were trying to navigate what was a really tough world. And a year and a half ago, I finally had my own first bout with COVID. And as I recovered from that, I had some visual symptoms, kind of a ectoplasm thing in my periphery. That seemed weird from what I knew of COVID, but being my own first experience with it, I spent some time digging into whether that was actually a symptom. And you know what? If you Google any symptom plus COVID, you'll find a paper out there about somebody who had it and had the two co-occur, and musings about whether there might be some kind of causation. But I ended up doing the thing that I'm actually supposed to do, and I made an appointment to follow up about it. And here I'm the poster kid for no, don't ignore your symptoms, because I think this actually may have saved my life. I went to a retinal specialist. I was passed to another specialist and was told it was uveal melanoma, an extremely rare cancer of the eye. And so this, I've had like rounds of going through cancer, and my brain just kind of put on big kid pants and said, okay, I guess we're doing this again. Lucky we know what to do. And all these well-worn mental pathways just popped right back up out of the thicket. But those were all from the stand here, do what we say, and we're pretty sure you'll be okay playbook. The specialist recommended treatment, handed me a pamphlet. I went home, Google, Medline, ChatGPT, what is this thing? And why did it have to be in my eye? It was like Indiana Jones and the snakes. I'm squeamish about my eyes. I put my contact lenses like in from the side so I don't see it coming. The first day I was worrying that I might have to get an injection in my eye, and that was the thing that was stressing me out. And it was the next day that I looked through the glossy pamphlet. I didn't want to start with a pamphlet. I wanted reams of data, not a pamphlet. But I finally looked at the pamphlet, and it had survival rate graphs on it. And I looked at it and I thought, that can't be right. I can't be reading this right. 50% chance that I'll be dead in 5 years. And I read it several times, and I fact checked it, and I looked at it and I said, oh, this isn't stand here, do what we say, we're pretty sure you'll be okay. This is let us mess with your eye and we'll let you flip a coin. And I had no preparedness for what to do with that. I basically just shut down. Over the next 2 weeks, I pretty much couldn't do anything. I kept going back to my bedroom, just lying down, trying to control my breathing. This is the point when I stopped drinking, because the one thing I had learned was that I knew I needed to at least feel like I was controlling something about my life. I learned a lot more in the last decade, as many of us had, about how carcinogenic alcohol is. So here was something I could do to improve my health. Probably not cure the already established cancer, but every time I wanted to drink, I got to feel like I was doing something. I was driving, I was participating. Eventually, I realized there, were a few treatment options. I did have choices, but they all had similar prognoses, similar efficacies. The one that had been recommended to me on day one was pretty reasonable, and I probably shouldn't be overthinking, because I really could barely think at all at that point. There was a clear path for at least attempting to attend to my physical health, and what really needed attention right there was my mental health. So I got a therapist. I also confronted the thing that I think is one of the most insidious, unmentioned challenges of cancer, and that's how often you discover it from mild symptoms or an accidental discovery on imaging, where overall you feel fine, but medical science will tell you you need to start treating it immediately. It's this blitzkrieg mugging. The moment you get diagnosed with cancer, you're suddenly racing toward the treatment. The treatment is going to be worse than the early stages of the disease, but you can't put it off. To protect your life, you have to run as fast as you can toward feeling terrible. I feared that I might go into chemo, or I might lose my eye and my binocular vision, so I hastily arranged a snowboarding trip, something that I loved and didn't know if I would get to do again. And so that's something it took me a couple times to realize, that the clock moves really fast here when first diagnosed, and carpe diem. I think that's good advice for everybody throughout their life, but it was really important for me there. Eventually, it did come time for the proton beam radiation therapy that I selected. I got to make lots of Ghostbusters jokes on social media about using nuclear accelerators to fight a ghost I could see following around on the corner of my eye vision. And I'm still combing the internet for ways to turn my 5-year survival chance from 50% to 60%. And I found some studies suggesting that intermittent fasting during radiation therapy might at least minimize the deleterious side effects. Early days in this research, very similar to what I found about antioxidants preventing hearing loss from a decade ago. The gamble that I didn't take based on the advice of my first oncologist. So I started asking them about intermittent fasting, asking my oncologist, my retinal specialist, and I got similar answers. Don't know much about this. Let's focus on the standard of care treatment. And I'm definitely not here to say that intermittent fasting is going to cure anyone's cancer, but this time I decided to try the intervention that had some promising small studies behind it, but none of my medical team supportive of, with full awareness that I was experimenting on myself. I arranged a consultation with a dietitian at Dana-Farber who said I should stop immediately if my weight began to drop, which is very sound advice. And I had to design my own protocol and had radiation every day for a week, so I just crammed a day's worth of eating into 4 hours every day. The real aha here was realizing how desperate I was for not just a sense of control, but for any sense of hope. My first two cancers each came with a lot of hope from mainstream standard of care. Telling someone you have cancer nowadays is about as much information as saying you have a virus. Could be influenza, could be Ebola, could be rabies. This cancer was more in the Ebola camp than the influenza one, and there just wasn't enough hope there for me to get through the day. Hope had been the fuel that had been behind my blogging and my biking to chemo and cracking jokes about radioactive urine. And I really underappreciated how much of a gift it had been for me the first couple of cancers, that I had faith in the standard of care. I had hope. It was a gift in the obvious way that I had good prognoses, but beyond that, it was allowing me to function. I have no idea if fasting before shooting proton beams at my eye did anything for me, but I'm actually still regularly fasting over a year later, and I went snowboarding again this last winter. My hearing sucks. My eye used to be happier. I have to take synthetic hormones every day, and I'm still monitoring for a recurrence, and I miss wine, but my day-to-day is actually pretty normal. There's a lot more story I could tell, but I'll wrap up here for time and allow for questions. When you're being treated for cancer, you're managing significant risks, and you have to be the one to do it. Be as clear with yourself as you can about how your own psychology and state of mind interacts with how you're managing those risks. Get as much information as you can about what the risks are, and include your mental health in your treatment plan. Be honest with yourself about how engaging directly with managing the risks to your physical health is impacting your mental health. And I'll stop there, and thanks. And Roger, I see you got your hand up.
Yes, I do. Sorry, hope you can see me. So it's interesting how you started your talk with the discussion about how you gave up alcohol. You know, I had my last drink the night before I got my first cancer biomarker too. You know, but since then I've met a lot of cancer patients, including a lot of pancreatic cancer patients. I always ask them if they're still drinking, and so often it's, well, yeah, I have one or two glasses of wine a day because my doctor says that's okay. And you know, the Surgeon General finally got around. They're always late to the party, but their last report, it says right in that report there is no safe amount of alcohol. And I'm just gonna comment. I just think it's interesting how many people have so much trouble giving that up when it's such an easy thing to do to help improve your odds.
Yeah, I agree with you, Roger. I'll say, like, I believe, like, we've learned more and more about this in really just the last 10 years, I'd say. Like, we've known it's got downsides for a while, but I think the evidence is piling up. And I also, again, like, I do miss it. I like a drink a lot. And I don't want to downplay like how good it is for like a social cohesion, but it also, again, every time I want to drink and I don't drink, it feels like I'm attending to my health, which is a very pleasant feeling for me.
If I could follow up one other thing, you mentioned the COVID stuff, and there's been kind of a flurry of chatter online and reports, and it's become sort of it's a controversial issue. And there was just a study I just found yesterday, and I'd sent it to Brad, a Japanese study, not peer reviewed, that found a link between the COVID vaccine and cancer rates. And the theory is that it increased a protein, IgG4, that was immunosuppressive. I wonder if you're in your research of this, if you found anything either supporting or disclaiming that, or
I have
disproving that claim.
I personally have not. I was really looking for the like, why is there something weird going in my eye at the time? And my own thing with COVID was, wow, that was really bad. I'm very glad I was vaccinated going into this. I don't want this. I don't wish that was any worse. I see something in the chat here. We're all three cancers sequenced. Was there a genomic connection? No. And this is, I mean, there's an obvious thing here, which is like, are you just unlucky, Ert, or is there like what's going on with you? No, we didn't do sequencing. There was a biopsy of the uveal melanoma that we did do some sequencing on that ended up being really, really great for me. In fact, it came out very good. And the genomic panels that I've done to try and figure out if there's anything underlying all my cancers have not turned up anything as of yet.
There's another question from Alan Morris. Were you less than 55 years old when you were diagnosed with thyroid cancer? Did you have papillary thyroid cancer?
Yes, it was papillary, and I was well less than 55. I was 43.
Okay. And Chris, you have a question. Why don't you voice it here? It's in the chat.
Oh, I just put it in there. So there is in terms of nutrition, it's actually interesting how little oncologists are interested in that. There is good research on this. One sarcoma patient actually out of Singapore, actually a software engineer, actually looked into nutrition very thoroughly and actually reviewed hundreds of peer-reviewed papers, both experimental but also clinical papers, and summarized that in his course. And he and I, we are actually thinking on whether we should actually write a survey together or do some other YouTube stuff on that, because nutrition is really important. And the part on alcohol and cancer, that's also a thing that is often completely underestimated. And I think it's because it is not promoted and not marketed. There is no financial incentive for any oncologist to really look into this. And that's the sad thing, that unless there is really a financial incentive, there could be actually very good opportunities that actually have an impact on your health that are often therefore not known. Just as a comment.
Yeah, thanks for both those points, Chris. And in fact, I'll like keep that link for myself. Yeah, I'll say, like, talking to the dietitian that I did before I started the fasting, the impression I got from talking to her, who she's a dietitian at a cancer center, is most people with cancer are just really not paying attention to it very much at all, and just like some really basic nutritional support and guidance could help them a fair amount. And I agree, there's like a lot of good evidence that this is like a place to pay a lot more attention. I think anything that you did here would be really beneficial for the planet.
And it seems to be so. What he also reviewed are different aspects on what about ketogenic diet, what about vegan diet, etc. And it seems to be that there may be that may actually be cancer dependent. So there is good experimental evidence that a ketogenic diet has been beneficial for glioblastoma patients. There has been good evidence for other tumor types for the vegan diet, and so there's a Warburg effect. But tumors can have actually different metabolic states. What I haven't figured out yet, and it's really a question of bandwidth and time, is there is, so Seyfried is actually going that far that he says, well, cancer is a metabolic disease, which I think goes, for my taste, way too far. But there apparently cancers do have specific, some of them with Warburg effect is one example, specific metabolic profiles, and they would likely to benefit from a certain nutritional intervention. And I just haven't figured out yet whether it would make sense to do fasting, how fasting and chemotherapy can actually amplify chemotherapy effects. And so that is another area to take a closer look at it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like I will say, like, in my, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm certain to die, what can I do to avoid it? I certainly looked at oh, maybe I can just like get rid of my blood sugar one way or the other and they'll solve everything. I did end up, in addition to stopping drinking, I cut refined sugar out of my diet, and I also haven't added that back in at all as well. And I'm not sure that has like, I think that keeps my blood sugar stable. I doubt it did anything much for the cancer one way or the other, but I actually feel healthier in general. And I would say overall, like, I'm coming from this feeling healthier, period.
So most cancers are very glucose sensitive, and there are two factors. One is glucose spikes, but it's not only the glucose spikes, it's actually also the insulin spikes, because insulin and insulin growth factors are actually promoting tumor growth. And so it's not just the glucose spike, it's actually the insulin spike and the insulin growth factor spikes. And so that's the reason why it would make sense to keep your HbA1c low, or really avoid any peaks. And therefore, you can have a carbohydrate-based diet. That's not a problem, but you really want to avoid anything that triggers it. And you can get a glucose monitor to actually understand what triggers the peaks. And I would highly recommend that. So I've actually done this also on myself. It gives you an insight on which foods actually lead to glucose spikes and how long do they last.
That is a really interesting route I haven't thought of, actually, and I will look into a glucose monitor.
I bet Cindy is going to have something to say about that. Cindy has her hand raised.
Cindy, are you muted?
You're muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just want to actually piggyback on what Chris said, and then Ert, I have a question for you. Chris, I couldn't agree with you more, and some of you may know that we're doing a study that asks patients to wear a continuous glucose monitor. And so we actively will be looking at how different foods, and we'll see this in real time because it'll be connected to a dashboard. And then during the course of the study, because it's a lifestyle management study, we're able to ask them to modify their diet with the hope that by lowering the glucose spikes and also the insulin spikes, that it will have a benefit for their objective myeloma biomarkers. So I couldn't agree with you more. Ert, it's really helpful to hear all the stuff that you've talked about, because I work with patients directly, and I also have had a cancer diagnosis myself. In fact, the way I got into this kind of, this became sort of my wheelhouse, was that there just weren't programs. I couldn't find the program that I wanted out there after I had no evidence of disease to help me try to stave off recurrence. And so I literally created that program because it was too scary not to. Surveillance didn't seem like it was the answer. So I like so much of what you're saying about, first of all, you had to find your own way. I mean, my question to you is basically saying, well, I know that you have every person diagnosed with cancer has to find their own way in terms of what works for them, what doesn't work. There are some patients that will have a drink, every, couple of weeks or something like that. There are others that won't. So everyone finds their own resting point, I believe. But since you are a veteran of cancer, I want to know, are there any for someone, let's say, who's newly diagnosed, any things that you what would you put on the list of what a person newly diagnosed with cancer wants to look at? In other words, get testing for mutations, get testing in terms of chemotherapy sensitivity. Like, do you have a list? That's something that I'm always trying to formulate and tweak for the people who I see.
Yeah. It's a great question. Thanks, Cindy. Probably the short answer is like, no, I don't really have a list. Certainly, my own history in genomics has me quickly going to oh, everybody should do a screening panel of some variety, see if you've got any risk factors one way or the other. I have the sense that it's not that often for somebody newly diagnosed that would turn up things that will affect their treatment plan, and certainly it could. I just generally, the thing that was most useful for me, less than get tested for something, was learn as much as you can about your cancer and learn as much as you can about what the various treatment options are. So it was less about myself and more about what is the standard of care and what is the cutting edge research in what I am fighting right now. And the thing that changed for me across my entire journey was realizing how that was guiding some of my treatment in some cases, but also what it was it was giving me a sense that I was steering my own fate, which was actually really, really useful for me. I think I probably took that a little far abroad from where you're hoping the answer would go.
Okay. Ert, one of the things is that we're trying to do is hold you up as a role model for people that are engaging in their care and then putting their finger on the scale at certain choices as you described. I can do this and delay, or I can do this and take it sooner. I'm going to have this side effect versus this like higher likelihood of efficacy. And all those trade-off decisions you could get more intimately involved in. But somebody in general, like the general population, might look at you and say, well, you had that scientific background, you had that. Can you speak to whether you think that you are uniquely qualified to be able to have those more informed participations in your care, or whether with ChatGPT and other things, people could come up the learning curve if they were in a situation similar to yours without your background?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. And I'll give the top line, which is like, no, I do not believe that I'm uniquely qualified here. I think this is something that anybody can do, and I think that the chat bots and the internet that we have today makes it even easier for anybody to be able to do it. And I will say that so I did study biology as an undergrad. I did as I say, work in the Genome Project. I do have a lot in like the general space. But honestly, I really regret that when I was 20 and studying biology, I found cancer the most boring thing in everything I was looking at. I was interested in genetics, I was interested in bioinformatics and stuff like that, and cancer would come up, and I'd be like, oh, do we have to talk about this? I didn't have a lot of people in my life who had been touched by it at that point, and it did not seem like something where I wanted to spend to do a deep dive. So I actually didn't come to my first cancer diagnosis with I know all about this. I in fact was like opening textbooks that I should have paid more attention to when I was an undergrad at that point. So there's lots of information out there, and I am not a uniquely capable person here.
And now that you have your knowledge, and thank you for sharing, I'm looking forward to writing up the notes for this, because I think we're going to have a dozen or more recommendations or lessons learned that you're going to share with people. What has been your experience now, just building on that, in terms of paying it forward? I imagine that people who know you and know that you've had cancer and now they're newly diagnosed come to you and say, what should I do? And you're now sort of on their advisory team as they go forward. Can you describe what your experience has been there?
Yeah. Fewer people than one might think, I would say, because again, my cancers I was relatively young when I was first diagnosed, and in my social network, luckily there aren't so many people that have had to enter this. But I have supported my own parents. Both had cancer when they died in the last few years. And my brother-in-law had it. I supported a lot of people through their cancer diagnoses that were related to me. And I'll tell you, I start with my go look into different options, go get second opinions, go look at other centers. And one of the things I'll note here is I grew up in Canada, and most of my relatives are still in Canada. And I got to experience what it was like for them to try and reach for that in the Canadian healthcare system versus me in the US system with a pretty good insurance plan. And it was very, very different. I found it very, very difficult to help them get second opinions because there was a system that was really steering them in one way or another that was relatively rigid. So one, it has given me like a real appreciation of the privilege that I have here to be able to even go out and get the second opinions. And that is usually like one of the things that I start from, and not just because I think the first opinion they got is necessarily a bad choice, but it really helps you feel that you're making a good choice when you hear from a second provider who has been studying this, that yes, they agree. And it also like helps you feel that you are steering and controlling and involved and thinking about and knowing what to ask for.
Thank you. Helen has several questions in the chat. Helen, do you want me to read them, or could you just choose and voice them yourself?
Let's see. Brad, just the last two. The first two are a couple of comments.
Okay. Ert, do you do IF every day? What's IF?
Intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting every day of the week, eating around a 4-hour period. Are 12 to 4-hour fasting periods effective as well?
Yeah, Thanks for asking. The 4 hours a day was a thing I had to invent to try and do intermittent fasting. Well, I also needed to eat every day for that period of treatment. What I do today is I do a 16-hour fast probably 3 days a week, and I do a 36-hour fast 1 day a week, which I am doing actually right now today. And I rather like how I feel doing it. It's pretty nice. Even though I'm hungry. Did you think about genetic testing when my parents had cancer? In fact, my parents got cancer after I did. So no, I did not. I mean, I certainly thought about it again just because, I'm studying genomics. I want to sequence my own DNA, but I had not done any scanning previously.
Did
You
you,
didn't see any hereditary or genetic similarities between yourself and your parents.
No. What I will say is, and I don't know what I should have done with this information, but honestly, I had uh, uh, a cautionary indication for testicular cancer when I was born. Apparently, I had a undescended testicle, which is a risk factor. I didn't know this until it came up at the time, and my mother said, "Oh, did you know that?" So on and so forth. And the uveal melanoma, I had a nevus, like a freckle on my retina, so we were like watching this all along. So there was some knowledge of this. If anything, it gives me a bit of comfort that maybe actually I am just unlucky, and there were things that I knew about beforehand if I've been paying more attention to. But generally, no, this all kind of came out of nowhere for me.
Chris has a question about sort of, I think it's monitoring. Like when you had your ocular melanoma diagnosis, is there currently any evidence for metastases? So how are you monitoring? You've got 3 cancers. Are there some liquid biopsies that you can use, or others, or is it scans or what have you? How do you monitor residual disease for yourself with 3 cancers?
Yeah, thanks. I love that question, Chris. Yes, I am monitoring. The diagnosis was, what is it, April? So 16 months ago was the original diagnosis, and the treatment was shortly after that. As I said, I had a biopsy at the time, and that biopsy was they did do an expression panel for it called Decision DX from Castle Biosciences, and that was pretty good predictive tool that told me I had a pretty good prognosis, that essentially like we caught it in time there. So based on that tailored my monitoring schedule. And in fact, my oncologist said, like, you know what, we could do like a yearly MRI. And that is what I have done. I have had my first follow-up from that. That is looking for metastases. And then I also go back to the retinal specialist and do an ultrasound on my eye and other follow-ups from that to see how the primary tumor is doing. And the primary tumor is slowly shrinking. So roughly every year monitoring for metastases and every 6 months monitoring for the primary tumor.
Are there unique biomarkers to your cancer that could be monitored through a liquid biopsy?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's a great question that I should potentially like double check on.
Because I'll just share that that's what I'm getting for my cancer. It's a Signatera, a Natera Signatera test for like CD19, CD20, which is the lymphoma markers that I have. And it's very, very focused on those biomarkers. And they're getting pretty good at detecting things like that from a liquid biopsy. Cindy, you raised your hand again.
Yeah. So, all of us have cancer cells in our body. And typically the immune system handles these cells, and we don't hear anything more about them until we do, and then we do more and more and more. So, it doesn't surprise me when there was no genetic, let's say, telltale signs that you were able to find when you were looking for them, or there was no genetic connection that you saw with your parents. And certainly, we have mutations, so you could say, well, here's, genetic mutation, but that often is epigenetic. So I guess what I'm wondering, and also after there's no evidence of disease, we still have dormant cells, especially if there was a metastatic cancer, and probably not even if there was a metastatic cancer there because it's microscopic. But the point being, there's research now that shows those dormant cells can become activated based on stress and so forth. Was a really interesting study that came out, I think about a year or two ago. So my question is, how, if at all, have you thought about, sort of the lifestyle I'm saying it wrong, stress and perhaps other factors that may have made your body into a sort of a cancer producing kind of machine? And it sounds like, if I have this right, there's no evidence of disease now. How do you think about, like, is it in your own mind, and you may of course not know for certain, but um, do you think that it's the intermittent fasting? What do you think is working for you now that has kept all of this, at least for the time being, at bay?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. So gotta not touch wood here. Yeah, no evidence of disease right now. It is a little bit still early days for me in this most recent diagnosis. Um, and so, I've spoken about I've stopped drinking. I'm still not doing refined sugar. I started doing yoga every day when I was first diagnosed. It's not an everyday anymore, but I'm doing more than I used to. I'm not very good at controlling stress in relation to my job, which is something that I am maybe probably more focused on. How do I get that better under control? So I think just generally, and I think this is maybe a common experience for a lot of cancer patients, cancer survivors, is they like, oh, maybe I better pay more attention to my health. Like, it's not like I didn't know that I should be eating healthier and fewer sweets and more vegetables and get more exercise and like all the other things to look at are. I do feel I have more of a fire under my butt to actually like follow through and pay attention to that thing now. And I certainly do have a sense to where there are always cells that are like starting to become cancerous. I say that a lot to people one way or another now, and I'm thinking I need to give my body every chance it can to like fight to squash those back down. Yeah. Did I hit all the points there? Let's see. Rick, I see in the chat, Americans complain a lot about our health system. With our desire for choice, we would never tolerate a national health system. Definitely definitely a possibility. I have, having watched both the Canadian and American systems up close, I have complaints about each of them. Neither of them has it nailed. Brad, I had another comment about biomarkers. So no, I don't have any for the uveal melanoma, but I certainly am following biomarkers for both the testicular and the thyroid cancer. But those are thankfully far enough in the rearview mirror now that I'm feeling pretty good that we've got those well under control and well past at this point.
Regarding biomarkers, so the Decision DX for uveal melanoma usually is a prognostic indicator. And usually if you are class 1A or class B, it's probably something like, I think the risk is 2% or 21%. And then if you are class B is class 2, then it's a 72% risk over 5 years, right? So that's, and you're probably, are you a class 1A or 1B?
1A. I was very lucky.
Yeah, you're very, very lucky. It's very unlikely that this will then reoccur. And I was just trying to understand whether Signatera would actually, whether it would have enough tissue for Signatera, probably not. But it does look now like you're in a pretty good shape, and you should also have no metastasis at this point. And it's very unlikely to get metastases.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And indeed, it is, I marvel sometimes at the like, I'm feeling like delightedly happy that I have a single-digit percentage chance of having cancer metastases. It's very different than where my head was some years ago. But yeah, I'll take what I could get. I'll also like say on this test. So again, this test was like pretty instrumental in how I designed my monitoring. And in fact, it has allowed me to say like, oh, I can get by with like one MRI a year instead of two or more. Knowing how much an MRI costs, I think like, this is saving the system a lot of money. And I in Castle Biosciences had to fight really hard with insurance to say that this is worth it. And I'm pretty sure that we're saving them money because of having done this. And it was really surprising to me that it wasn't just obvious to them that this is, yeah, you should do this and you run with it.
So how was it with the insurance? Is it that you were suggesting less diagnostic than the insurance wanted you to have?
The insurance was saying we're not sure that we want to cover the DecisionDx biopsy.
Oh yeah. And this is a pretty robust assay. It's actually very impressive, and it's very specific to that, and it's well published. And because uveal melanoma is not as common, insurance companies are just not that familiar with it.
Yeah. In the end, we did successfully argue for it, but it was like a months-long debate.
Right. What was the cost for the test? 9,000 or?
Yeah, it was like 8,000, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Cindy, you have another question?
No, I think I just didn't put my hand down.
Okay. Rick Davis, you have a question or comment?
So I just posted two links in the chat that appeared in JAMA on Monday, I think it was. Yeah, it was on Monday. And they came to my mind because we were talking about monitoring for cancers, which is a huge issue. Also, the viability of whole body scans, which I was talking about with Jeff Waldron on Sunday, Brad. And these particular articles, one is an editorial on the first article.
Rick, to interrupt, sorry, but David Plunkett noted that I don't see it in the chat, nor does he.
Oh, well,
You
thank you. It's because I forgot to click the arrow. I put them in the chat and I didn't put the arrow. There you go, David. Sorry. Thank you for telling me. So, it suggests that there is, I think it was I don't quote me, you'll have to read it yourself, but something like an 8% higher chance of future cancers from CT monitoring. I was bamboozled by the math. I can't see how they came up with what they came up with. So they surveyed 60 million patients who had 90 million CT scans, which is about 1.5 CT scans per person. They came up with 103,000 additional cancers, and they suggested that was an increase of 8% in risk. The math just doesn't make sense to me. So other people can look, but it certainly got past the peers because it got into JAMA and there was an editorial. But I thought I would bring it to the attention of this august group because
sounds like a selection bias to me. Like people are getting more CT scans. It might be because they have more disease.
Fair point.
I don't know, but it's an issue that we've been looking at quite a bit, which is what do people with Lynch syndrome in particular is called RI, but what do people who have these mutations or who seem to be faced with more cancers, how do they monitor themselves? I mean, the anxiety that you live with on a day-to-day basis because you don't know where the next cancer is going to be is a real issue. So I'm just sort of raising that for
right. Rick, I have to leave soon, so I'm interrupting you here because it's burning to me. Because here's the thing: whole body MRIs is one way where you can actually have a good way to monitor this. And if you do this every 2 or every 5 years or whatever, that is reasonable. And if you have a Lynch syndrome, you probably want to have, I mean, you actually need to also to look at colon screening, and for that, the CT scan is not really the ideal anyway. But the whole thing against whole body MRI or whole body screening is actually used for, the CT scan is used as an example for that. And yes, CT scans do increase the relative risk, not, we need to distinguish between the relative risk and the absolute risk. And insurance companies do everything they can to make sure that we don't get regular screening. And the key for regular screening is MRI, which is not radiation exposure. But by putting out that CT scans increase the risk for cancers, that actually feeds into the mindset of physicians, oh, whole body screening and scanning of body scanning is not good. Think about MRIs.
Yeah. My testicular cancer monitoring was CT scans, and I'm now doing MRIs for my follow-ups, and I'm a lot happier to be doing the MRIs rather than a lot of CT scans for this exact reason, even though the monitoring was worth it to me at the time with the CT scan.
David, you have a question, and I'm going to stop the recording shortly because we're coming to the hour.
Just to say that I enrolled in a clinical trial, and one of the consequences of that is that I get CT scans and nuclear medicine bone scans 4 times a year. And as part of my decision-making process on enrolling was I willing to accept the risk of other or further cancers down the road? And I decided to take that risk because honestly, at the time, I didn't expect to live that long anyway.
Yeah. Maybe as a way to wrap this all up, I'll say, like, Ert, you've had 3 cancers. Like, have you found like what was underlying that caused all of them? And it certainly is not lost on me that I am somebody who has had a lot of CT scans, and I've swallowed radioactive material, and I've had radiation therapy and chemotherapy, and the treatment for cancers we know like may give rise to subsequent cancers and increases your chances there. So it may be that I unfortunately got in a treadmill at some point. But I hope this is all behind me.